Hello, everybody. My name is Scott DeWitt, and I'm one of the instructors for the class that you're enrolled in, Composing for Public Audiences, Writing, Rhetoric, and Research. I can say good morning to you because I am in Columbus, Ohio in the United States, and it's about 10 o'clock in the morning. And I am joined by two of my colleagues here, and I think I will let them introduce themselves and say hello to you also.
Sure. So hello everyone. What a coincidence. It's 10 a.m. where I am too, which also happens to be Columbus, Ohio. My name is Ben McCorkle and I'm one of the faculty instructors for the MOOC as well.
I'm Paula Miller. I'm also in Columbus, Ohio. I am one of the lead designers here on this MOOC, so I did a lot of work actually building out the design of the MOOC that you're operating within, and I'm also a graduate student at Ohio State.
So these are our office hours, and let me explain a little bit about how we have these structured, and we expect that these office hours become more involved and more robust as the course continues. This is our first one. So we kind of imagine these almost like a radio call-in show, but instead of people calling in, they can email questions to us. So we have an email address for the MOOC, and that's posted all over the website that you can find. And so when we get to doing these office hours, it's really great if the student participants want to email questions into us, and then 2 or 3 of the faculty members who are teaching the course will be taking those questions and providing answers and having conversations about some of those questions. And so then the other thing is that we do this live, but there will also be a recording of the office hours. So if either you cannot watch the office hours live, or maybe you're in a part of the world where you are sound asleep while we are doing this live, you can see the office hours later on whenever it's most convenient for you. Those will be posted online also. This time one other thing that I want to say is that what we love about this class is the exchange among all of the members, both the instructors and the students. And so what we find is that the more we can get your questions into the public spaces in the class, primarily those discussion forums, I think that we just are inviting more conversation, and people have really interesting perspectives on those questions. So when we get to the office hours, it's really great to email us some questions that you have. Our email address is going to be reserved primarily for these office hours, so we don't check the email address regularly. What we're far more interested in having you post those questions in the discussion forums. You should feel free to try to answer each other's questions. I think that's one of the great things about an online class, is that you all have the opportunity to do that. We will also be looking at those discussion forums, and we'll jump in when we also have answers for your questions.
And if I could, the email address is, incidentally, is composingmooc, all one word, at gmail.com, composingmooc@gmail.com. And I just wanted to take a moment to personally welcome everyone who's joined this MOOC already and have started participating in the discussion forums and elsewhere. I was doing a little digging around this morning trying to find out who our participants are. They come from the U.S., obviously, but also Cameroon, Italy, the UK, and elsewhere. There's a diversity of backgrounds and experiences. So to Scott's point about this being a writer's exchange, I think that's an important aspect. When we come from different places and have different worldviews, in terms of rhetorical understanding, that helps really enhance that feature. People are visual artists, they're writers, they have backgrounds in law, communications, PR, marketing. There's even an entrepreneur in the group. And that's just the handful of people who have already contributed. So I expect that diversity of background and experience to only grow as we move through the course.
Yeah, we've been teaching. I think this is our 3rd offering of this course in a MOOC format, and I think that one of the most fascinating parts of this MOOC is that diversity of the student participants that we often don't see in traditional college classes. Traditional college classes tend to be designed for specific populations who are at specific points in their writing careers, and this MOOC just opens all of that up, and we have this opportunity to hear from so many different people with all different kinds of backgrounds and experiences at all different levels of writing, and it becomes this really powerful community where people are sharing and exchanging and talking to one another.
Paula, could you talk a little bit about the Getting Started module and some of the stuff that the incoming participants need to be aware of as they get basically move towards the first assignment?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So the Getting Started module includes the Canvas user orientation and the Getting Started module overview, which is an overview of this particular course within Canvas. If you take a look at the Getting Started module, you'll see that we filmed a course introduction that tells you about how the course is paced, what assignments you can expect, and also introduces you to the team of instructors who are leading this course. And you'll see there are quite a few of us. Each office hour is going to allow you to interact with a different set of instructors where I'll be rotating during these office hours. So if you go through the Getting Started module, if you already have, you'll see that we have information about the course, what sort of background you might want to bring to the course if you're thinking about taking it, and also the syllabus, which tells you about the assignments in the module, how it's structured, and what you can expect in a typical week's worth of work. The other component of the Getting Started module overview that's really interesting is the World Englishes tab. It's the third tab in the Getting Started module overview. And there's a lot of information about different kinds of Englishes that people speak around the world. Of course, there's the standard American academic English that a lot of college students at OSU are familiar with. But this module also explores the different Englishes in different regions and in different settings. So I encourage you to take a look at these videos. We have interviews from professionals and academics, but also interviews from these speakers of World Englishes who have been previous participants in our MOOCs. Oh, and you know, one other thing I might want to mention. I saw that quite a few of you jumped in and introduced yourselves in the Introduce Yourself forum. If you haven't done that yet, and I see we've got a couple viewers here, if you haven't done that, I encourage you to introduce yourself and also take a look at all the different students who are in this class. Like Ben said, there's a wide range of students who are taking this class. So take a look at who your fellow students are, because you're going to be interacting with them on the forums for the duration of the course.
Right. Paula, quickly, just to follow up, the World Englishes aspect of this Getting Started module is particularly important, I think, because it helps remind us that we all come from different kind of linguistic backgrounds and have different experiences. And indeed, in fact, our experience with English specifically is very different depending on which part of the world we come from. Mm-hmm. There is a discussion forum post called Writing and Learning in a Global Context. David Alexander's already posted there and wrote pretty eloquently about the importance of recognizing the fact that there are multiple Englishes out there. I'm reminded of our former partner in this MOOC, Cindy Self's advice about reading generously in this experience. You know, when it comes to engaging in that writer's exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing we might also point out, we have not received any questions at our email address for this particular office hours, but I have my eye on the inbox. So if you are watching this live and you do have a specific question, you could send this. We could actually turn this into like a live call-in show. You could actually send an email right now. I've got my eye on the inbox, and we'll just see if anything comes in. In the meantime, what we might do is that there have been some questions that have popped up in the discussion forums. What I love about when that happens is that it's so great when the instructors get there and we realize that you've already answered the questions for one another, and we're already starting to see some of that happening. I think some of the questions have been about getting started. Some of the questions have been about how long should this essay be, the difference between writing that might be very much about invention, trying to find the ideas, and then refining that in writing and turning it into something that might be more for a public audience, something that you're going to want to post to the discussion forums. And then there's also been some questions about the Canvas interface. Canvas is the program that we're using to house the MOOC. And I think it's important for you to know that we are somewhat new to Canvas ourselves. This is the first time we've offered the course in this format. And so your questions about Canvas are particularly important to us because not only are we new to using Canvas, but we've also been using it so much in the last couple of months that it does make sense to us. We know where things are, and if it's not making sense to you, it's really important for us to know that stuff. So feel free to ask some questions about the interface. And also feel free to poke around. You might actually find, by just poking around, don't be afraid, you're not going to break anything, just poke around in the website a little bit, and you might find that the answer is sitting there for you also if you just look a little bit.
I also want to point out another option for interacting with us live. So if you take a look at the announcement that went up about the Hangout, you'll see that there are two links in the announcement. One is to the Google version, and the other is to the actual G+ Hangout. Now, if you go there, you have the option of participating in the Q&A. We've turned on the Q&A app. So for those of you who are currently live viewing, if you have a Google account, go to the G+ link and log in. And you can submit questions live, and then we can answer them here and also display the question, your question, in your own words on the screen. So that's another option. You can also keep sending your questions to the Gmail.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I just actually pulled up the Q&A tab on my Hangout, so I can see it. Another thing I want to highlight for you, if you're acclimating to the interface and our structure of this particular MOOC, is that in the discussion forums themselves, we have areas where you can ask questions. Among them, we have general questions forum, which deals with general questions. We also have tech support forum, so if there are issues specifically with the interface, or maybe you're having problems that might be glitchy or other kind of errors, that might be a place to ask that. We might end up eventually forwarding that to the Canvas folks. There's a research questions forum where you can talk about things related to kind of experiment design, research ethics, the whole kit and caboodle there. And then, of course, as Scott has mentioned already, there's the email address that we like to use for our office hours. So just be mindful that there are all those spaces that we will be monitoring and paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, maybe this would be a really great time. Ben and Paula and I can kind of have a conversation about this, just this general topic of getting started with the Module 1 assignment. In the past, when we've taught this class, what I love about this assignment is that students often start by saying, I write a lot, and I believe a lot in some social causes, but I don't know how those two things come together. And then after we do some brainstorming, they think about some things. They realize that those things really do. They have a lot of relationship between the two of them. So I'm wondering if maybe the three of us might just talk a little bit about some helpful advice about getting started with this assignment, how we might help some students think about getting the paper off the ground.
Well, I come from a Writing Center background. As a former Writing Center tutor and Writing Center director, and I really believe in the value of having conversations as a way to think through and sort of discover what it is you're thinking and refine what it is you're thinking. And one place to have those conversations is the discussion forum, to jump in and just kind of start talking about what you're thinking and maybe responding to what other people are thinking with questions that help drill down. But also feel free to have conversations that kind of think aloud with the people in your lives. And you might find that you discover things about yourself that you really hadn't thought about in that way through the act of conversing with another person. So I think if I were doing this assignment, that would be my starting point, is to just talk to people about it and to think out loud.
One of the ways I would kind of tackle this question, and So I think is generally an issue with a lot of student writers. They don't have, oftentimes don't have confidence in their writing and the development of their voice at that point. And it's perhaps particularly an issue with the theme of this course, who I am as a writer with a cause. So the question of authority, I think, looms large here. In other words, how do writers develop an authentic sense of authority given this topic? How do they feel empowered to speak up? Who am I? You know, who am I to say anything about global warming or mental health advocacy or any of the topics that you've already talked about? So I think my approach, if I were a student or a participant in this course and developing a project, is to start with that question. How do I develop that authoritative voice? And I think the way we structured this course, it kind of starts from a position where simply having passion about a topic is one way into it. That being able to say, this is something I feel passionately about, strongly about, this is something I want others to likewise feel strongly about, itself is a rhetorical move that's worth lingering on. Eventually, as the course unfolds, you'll be incorporating research and external voices and writing for particular genres that will help enhance that authoritative voice. But it is enough that you care about something, you know. This is something, and I know we come from all over the world here in this course, but when I teach in my brick and mortar classroom, this is one of these hobby horses or cause celebs or whatever that I like to harp on a lot, which is the fact that you're not just learning to write well, you're learning to become a more engaged, assertive citizen in your community and in your country and your world at large by engaging in these kinds of activities. So finding that authoritative voice from that early stage, I think, is really important.
And I think that that I would build off of both of what Ben and Paula said. I think that starting with something that Ben said is that sometimes finding that authoritative voice, that real confidence, means I think we tend to want to write about really big topics. Mm-hmm. And I know that sometimes the really big topics, the reason that I don't feel super confident and authoritative is because they are so big and there's so much to know about them and there's so much that I don't know that I'm still learning. And the minute that I start thinking about some of the smaller topics in my life, the things that I am really engaged with on a daily basis or regularly, suddenly what I realize is that my level of confidence starts to go up, and I know a lot about that very small topic. So you don't have to gravitate toward the big world issues. You certainly can if you want to, and I think that I think a lot of people in the class probably are very engaged in that. But I'm engaged in some smaller issues. I have recently rescued a dog, and it's very much on my mind about how much writing I'm doing about this experience that I've had right now with taking a dog who was in crisis, bringing the dog into my home, training the dog, how important I think that really is in my community to rescue animals. I teach adults in these large ukulele classes, and at first I would think, like, well, that doesn't really feel like a cause to me. But then when I start listening to the people who are taking this class, I find that it's really important to them because they've learned to engage in art and they've learned to engage in music, and they themselves feel like they're becoming more creative and they're bringing that level of creativity to their home and to their workplace and to their community. So those are examples of two things that I don't think anybody would ever consider. Maybe the dog rescue issue, but like big world causes. But I think that I know a lot about them. I have very deep experiences with them. And I think I could write with great confidence about both of those topics.
Right. And this is exactly the mindset, how you develop authority, how you develop that sense of ethos. Starting small is a great idea. So, being able to speak from the personal experience of having a dog that you have rescued and you're going through the process of training this dog and you're relating narrative about that experience. it scales up, right? I mean, like it's ultimately about more than just this one dog, Ringo, by the way.
Who you might hear chewing. He's chewing on a bone in the background. I apologize for that.
But then suddenly it's about dog rescue in general. It scales up to the issue of animal ethics and animal rights, which is a big topic with global implications. It can upend entire industries, and cultures. And if you start from that issue of like, oh, I want to talk about animal cruelty or animal ethics or something like that, it can be a little daunting to find your voice, to find your authority. But if you're able to say, why am I interested in this big issue? Well, I have personal experience with it, and it starts here. Then that honing of focus, I think, is a way that you can kind of feel more confident in addressing your topic.
And the assignment really does want you to tell stories. It's about narrative. And I think what Ben just said is great, is that I don't have a story to tell about the big global issue. I have a story to tell about what's happening in my dining room right now as we're sitting here, and about taking the dog-to-dog class, and what I've learned about myself, and what it means to go to a dog class and to be a student again. It's like one of the rare moments where I've actually become a student again. I have lots and lots of stories, and those stories will relate. People will relate to those stories. My audience will relate to those stories. They'll also have stories, and again, that's where that exchange comes, is that suddenly we have these stories, we start sharing the stories, we have different perspectives, we might disagree, we might get into an argument, we might agree, we might come up with new ideas. That's what this assignment is really supposed to be getting you to think about. Ben, what are some other issues that you've seen popping up on the discussion forums that we might be able to help students with?
Well, one of them is kind of a logistical question that came up yesterday and early this morning. It was about when you've actually composed your Who I Am as a Writer with a Cause assignment, where does it go? And the short answer to that is we have a discussion forum set up for it. It is called, let me pull it up just so I get the actual name.
It's called the Module 1 Writer with a Cause Discussion Forum.
Right. So in that module, what you simply do is post your assignment as a reply in that thread, like a top-level reply. And then the idea is that the other participants will likewise post theirs in there, and that you'll also respond to other people's writing and basically generate a big, kind of energetic kind of exchange of original text, responses to the text, responses to the responses, and hopefully get a robust discussion going on in that particular forum. So, I was talking with Kay Halisak earlier today, and she suggested just pasting the text in there directly, not as an attachment or not necessarily as a link out to another site or anything, but just posting it in there, and so we can have an avalanche of text and ultimately promote that idea of the exchange that we're really trying to push.
And one thing that I might add to that idea of exchange, so as these discussion forums start to fill out, there's going to be a lot of texts to read, and it might feel a little overwhelming, and so we start to figure out, like, how do we develop strategies for jumping into the discussion forums and really being able to read things and respond to things. One strategy I might suggest that I think would be really, really helpful in this class, and I think would go a long way to the real community spirit, is, let's say I have 45 minutes in my day in the middle of the afternoon, and I'm going to use that 45 minutes to read and respond to some things in the discussion forums. I think a lot of people tend to gravitate towards those threads where there's already been lots of discussion going on. And I think that makes perfect sense, because you see that exchange in play, you see people responding to one another, and I think that's perfectly fine. Another strategy you might develop, though, is what happens if I look down those threads and I find somebody's post that there hasn't been a lot of that exchange going on? What you might be able to do then is to actually start a conversation on that thread. So I might gravitate toward a post where there hasn't been a lot of activity, and I might try to respond to something to see if I can generate some conversation around that post. And that will start to even out those conversations so that everybody's getting some reply to their post, everybody's stuff is getting read, instead of us just gravitating maybe toward the stuff that's at the top of the list or the stuff that already has a lot of conversation around it. And again, that's just a strategy and just a suggestion. And I think that we'll all develop different kinds of strategies for responding and participating in the discussion forums.
Right. Another question that popped up had to do with just discussion forum posts in general. You know, some of the associated activities. You know, the Rhetoric 101 posts, for example, the audience forum. I replied to one post and suggested that, you know, when we talk about short, I suggested maybe in the 250 word range. I don't know if that feels right to the two of you, but, you know, I'm thinking, and that's just a rough estimate, but, like, you know, double that is maybe too much, half that is maybe too little. I was curious to hear your thoughts on this.
I think that I always have a hard time visualizing words and lengths of things. That's not typically how my brain works. But I do know that you know, we're asking you to post your essays online. Obviously, those are going to be very long. But I do think that shorter, concise posts tend to generate more conversation and more discussion. Especially if people, you know, let's say I gave the example, oh, I've got 45 minutes. What if I only have 10 minutes? I've got 10 minutes in the middle of my day, and I think, you know what, I'm going to jump into the discussion forum and see what's going on there. Those short, concise responses are easy to read, and they're also easier to generate a response to. The pressure is off. If you keep thinking that you have to write this fully developed, long response that's very carefully articulated in every nook and cranny of the way, you'll never get anything on the discussion forums. The discussion forums can be a little bit freer. The pressure is off. This is not necessarily where we're writing super refined essays. It's a place where we get to contribute and have a conversation. So I think Ben's advice is really good.
And one important thing to keep in mind is that a lot of those associated activities are designed through writing to get you to think actively about the assignment that you're eventually going to produce. So thinking, for example, when we talk about Rhetoric 101 audience forum, that's making you think deliberately about how you would recast your topic to two separate audiences. What, you know, in other words, how do you manufacture interest in your topic when you talk to two different types or groups of people? That's bread and butter rhetorical theory right there. And likewise, some of the other ones on ethos and purpose and incorporating research, they likewise are designed to get you to think about all the different moving parts of the rhetorical process. And so think of them as kind of like building blocks that lead to the major assignments.
Yep.
Well, something else that we could talk about, there are level up challenges in every module. And in Module 1, your level up challenge is to post to the DALN, the Digital Archive of Literacy Narratives. You can post your Who I Am as a Writer with a Cause autobiographical narrative. I know Scott and Ben have both done a lot of work with the DALM with the past, so I'll let them talk a little bit about what it is, and then I can talk a little bit about the challenge.
Sure. You want to start, Scott?
Sure. So the DALN is the Digital Archive of Literacy Narratives. And when we spell it all out that way, it really does explain exactly what this is. It's an online archive of narrative stories that people have contributed about literacy, reading and writing experience. And literacy is thought of in some very, very broad terms. It's not just school reading and writing. It's any kind of reading and writing, and any kind of literacy act is fair game in this archive. And our colleagues, Cindy Self and Louis Ullman, who have since retired from Ohio State, started this archive. And what is the year? 2006, 2007? I mean,
around then, yeah.
We're about 10 years right now. Just they started it from the ground up, and they just started asking people to contribute these narratives. And those narratives are sometimes they're video, and sometimes they're audio, and sometimes they're written text. And over the years, this archive has grown. Ben, do you know the current number?
It is around 7,000 individual submissions,
yeah,
so it's a pretty sizable archive for our purposes. And yeah, it's exactly like Scott said. And the value of having an archive of that size is that for researchers and scholars and students who are able to go and visit that site, daln.osu.edu, by the way, you can look in there, and there's metadata associated with the contents, keywords, for example. So if you're interested in workplace literacies, or you're interested in gaming literacies, or you're interested in like how people learned music, as a ukulele instructor, you could go in and perform searches and find dozens, scores of similar literacy narratives. And if you're a scholar, you can start doing interesting things with those. Read those, look for patterns of how people talk about their experience, and analyze them in interesting ways. And ultimately, one of the key principles that led to the creation of this archive echoes what Scott was saying earlier about the importance of narrative as a way of kind of establishing voice and establishing ethos. We tell stories to each other, and those stories, since we've been communicating animals, have had tremendous importance in how we convey ideas and values and beliefs and all sorts of human endeavor. So yeah, the Level Up Challenge is essentially consider sending your work onto the DALN, getting it published, and basically serving a greater good.
I mean, ultimately, we're asking you to write a literacy narrative of sorts. It's not a purely academic research paper. We want you to tell stories, and these stories are about who you are as a writer. The fit for the DALN is perfect. So we really do encourage you to consider posting there. And another interesting use of the DALN, I think, two that I think of right now is. One is preservation of stories. So many people have such powerful stories about how literacy has made them the person that they are. And they share these stories orally. They share them with each other all the time. But I worry that some of these stories that are about a particular community or a particular historical moment, that these stories are not getting preserved. And who knows where the DALN will be in 10, 15, 20 years. Who knows what kind of technology we're going to be using or what kind of world we're going to be in. But I do think that it's pretty great that we're actually taking this time to actually capture some of these stories, get them into the archive, share them with other people. I also think another really interesting use is I keep directing creative writers to the archive, because creative writers are always trying to capture voice, or they're trying to capture a regional dialect, or they're trying to capture figures of speech. There's no better place to find any of that than in the Digital Archive of Literacy Narratives. If you've got somebody from the southern part of the United States talking about what it meant to learn to read and write in a rural community, my guess is that you're going to hear figures of speech, and you're going to hear dialect, and you're going to hear accents. And creative writers really need to tap into those kinds of things, and they can just listen and absorb and listen to the rhythms and the patterns of language. And I think it's really important to them also.
Right, and another value of the archive for participants in this MOOC specifically is it's a place where you could go to maybe look at previous work generated in other versions, earlier versions of this MOOC. For example, if you go to the daln.osu.edu and you search for terms such as MOOC or rhetorical composing, 2 words, or who I am as a writer, or various combinations of these terms, you can find other examples of how people have approached the topic. Because and one thing that might do is make you think about the different options that you have at your disposal in terms of writing this particular narrative. I could see the younger student writer version of myself looking at this assignment and thinking, oh, I need to write this heroic story of how I struggled and overcame and learned something great. But then if I went to the DALN and started looking at these, I might see that maybe that narrative structure isn't the most compelling. I might see alternative ways of telling stories. Maybe not stories of triumph, but stories of how people had missed opportunities or minor tragedies in their lives associated with not learning literacy, or things along that line. And so one thing it does is it kind of opens up the generic possibilities of an assignment like this, which I personally find useful. The more models you have, the more options you have for creating a new piece.
How about other things? I don't see anything has come in on the Q&A or into the inbox, so we have no live questions coming at us. Are you out there? I know this is always a little odd for us because we don't have a snapshot of who's watching us live, so we just imagine that we have a huge audience out there and everybody's following us.
Right.
We have 2 viewers currently.
All right. Well, I'm so hey. Ben, Paula, can you think of anything else that we should cover?
Well, I was just one of the things I alluded to earlier, but I wanted to kind of talk about in detail is kind of the expanse of topics people are considering covering already. And keep in mind the MOOC is just starting, and a handful of people are participating, but that number is growing as the days go by. But for example, there's one participant who is interested in global warming, another who is interested in psychology of fear, and how to frame that differently between children and adults, mental health awareness and advocacy. Dealing with the aftermath of the Brexit vote. A participant from the UK is particularly interested in that, and I think a good part of Europe, and in fact the entire world, is probably interested in dealing with that. Also language learning and how adult learners come to new languages compared to children. And that's just, in a day's worth of posting. So we are all over the map in terms of the causes that move us and the causes that we want to move others, and I can only see that growing in the coming days. So I'm already impressed by that spread. Yeah,
and I think that Ben, when you said right at the beginning of that what you were just talking about, you said that the MOOC is just starting. This is something that I think is really important to all of us to remind ourselves that there are lots of people in the MOOC and there are lots of people out there, and we are just getting started. So you'll start to see more stuff showing up in discussion forums, and then when the assignments are due, we're going to have lots of stuff showing up there. It's a real living, organic kind of beast, this MOOC, where all of this stuff will start to grow, and we're just getting started. Anything else you can think of?
Well, maybe, Paula, can you talk us through kind of the overall arc of the course, like where we are now, where we eventually go over the course of these next several weeks?
Yeah, sure, I can speak to that. So the first module is an opportunity for students to kind of situate themselves, figure out what motivates their writing, gives them a starting point. And then we're going to move through the unit and talking about how to make an argument. And we'll be talking about visual arguments. And actually, Professor McCorkle here has a lot of really great resources. He has a great analysis of a campaign poster that you're going to be seeing in that visual argument unit. And then we'll be talking about how to use research in those arguments, and we're going to end with a revision and reflection unit that gives you new tools for thinking about the ways you approach writing and rewriting. So really we're going to be taking you through sort of an arc of a writing process in order to create some products that will in some way connect with the cause that you choose here in this first unit. And I think the final unit that we're going to be doing is going to be a showcase where you get to display whatever it is you've created to your fellow writers.
So there's a logic to this. We've thought about like how you go from like what you already know and how do you know to talk about it to how do you convince or move or otherwise engage different audiences who might come from different backgrounds, to how do you incorporate other voices into your argument? How do you get it out to the public at large? How do you, you know, how do you revise? Which, you know, even as someone who writes professionally, this is always the bane of my existence. But it's something worth thinking about. Like, what does your process look like? So we've thought about that entire life cycle of the writing process through the course of these several weeks.
Yeah, and in the middle of it, you know, there's this assignment, this PSA assignment, where we start thinking about rhetoric outside of just the alphabetic print on the page. And so it's this really interesting moment where we think about audience and purpose and delivery and form, all of those rhetorical constructs, and we start thinking about the visual argument and all of these other ways in which we're engaged with rhetoric on a daily basis. And so we get to discuss those ideas, and actually you get to try to create some visual rhetoric yourself.
One of the things I'm excited to see as these next several weeks unfold is what the Canvas MOOC learning community looks like. We've done, as Scott has mentioned, we've done this course before a few times in Coursera. I imagine a different demographic, different size of course. I get the sense that this is going to be a bit smaller and more focused. I'm excited to see how the energy feels as we move through. So that's something I'm going to be paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe we should wrap this up a little bit. I do want to talk about the next office hour. I'm looking on my sheet here, and it looks like that one is scheduled for July 20th, also at 10 a.m. Paula will be joining you for that office hours, and also another instructor, Chad Iwerts, will be here for that. Like always, we will be sending out announcements of when those office hours are going to be, so you'll know exactly how when they're going to be and how to get to them. And then we'll also encourage questions so that you can send questions to us to our email address, or if you'd like to really do it live, we'd love to use this Q&A feature on Google Hangouts to see how that works.
Right. So just remember composingmooc@gmail.com. That's all one word, composingmooc@gmail.com. Also keep in mind the various discussion forums that are specifically kind of designed for technical questions, research questions, general questions, and of course whenever we have these office hours, as Scott said, we will obviously welcome live Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
What else, Paula?
Oh.
You know what? I think that was that was pretty thorough. I'm looking forward to the next office hours. Hopefully more students will be able to join us, and we'll have some questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about how things are going next week.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ben and Paula. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thanks everybody out there watching us live and those folks who are going to watch us on video later on.
Well, I'm out of coffee, so I think we are done.
And the puppy wants to play, so I'm going to go do that too. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.